Hello students, it's me, Professor Johansson, talking to you through your computer. Hello. I'm doing some lecture notes here. This is continuing in chapter 2.1. So we talked about functions. We did some graphs of functions. Making a table of values was the last example we did. Once we have a graph of a function, the next thing we need to consider is what we call the vertical line test. So this is a visual test of a graph to tell whether or not that graph represents a function or not. So our sort of definition of a function when we were doing the relations and we were listing the pairs of points to be a function, what we said is we're not allowed to repeat any x values. So no repeated x coordinates. So all the x values have to be unique. So we did that from pairs of points where we just looked at the x's and saw if there were any of the numbers that showed up more than once. So on a graph, let me sketch a quick graph of an equation. So I'm not going to be too particular about the x, y individual points. Let's graph one of those parabolas like we had yesterday. So let's say this is our curve, right? So the parabola here, this is just our normal xy plane. And so the question is, so is this a function? Right? Yes or no? So what the vertical line test says is if we can draw a vertical line that crosses this graph at more than one point, so drawing like a straight up and down line, any vertical line, if it crosses it at more than one point, crosses our graph, then it's not a function. Stated another way would be that if we can draw any vertical line possible and it only crosses the graph at most one time, then our graph is a function. So our test is, so draw some sample vertical lines. So if any of them cross more than once, then we're not a function. So it's kind of like an exclusionary test. We're sort of doing this test and seeing right, if it is a function or if it's not a function. We're sort of testing to see if we can cross at more than one point, then we're not a function. So let me sort of demonstrate that here on this graph. So this is our curve. The idea is that I can sort of draw any sample vertical line. So kind of roughly vertical, right? Any of these vertical lines that I draw, right? And you could draw, of course, many, many, many more. You could draw, tens, hundreds, thousands if you wanted to. But we can pretty reasonably see that each of these lines is only crossing our graph at one coordinate, right? So conceptually, each of these x's, right, is only getting graphed once onto our line. So the vertical lines are only crossing once, right? If we drew in, any number of them, right, we're only going to get one crossing point. So then in this case, this is a function, right? So we're passing the test because we only cross once. Scoot that up so you guys can see a little better. So if we compare this to a graph of something that might not be a function, so if we do another kind of quick sketch here, if I took the same kind of shape, this same kind of like parabola shape, but if I flipped it on its side so that it sort of curls around more like this. So same kind of general shape, right? It's still this sort of U shape, but it's flipped and it's turned sideways instead. So if I try to draw vertical lines, you know, in this case, almost any of the vertical lines that I draw is going to cross our graph in more than one place. It's enough to just have this happen with like one vertical line. To be a function means you really have to be a function everywhere. So even if there's only one point where you would double up on your x's, you would not be a function. So our vertical line test here, right, we're crossing more than once. Right, so function yes, no. In this case, our answer is no, right? We cross more than once. So that's the basics of it. Our vertical line test is trying to draw any vertical line. And if we only cross our graph once, then we're going to be a function. If we can draw even just one vertical line that crosses more than once, it's going to mean we're not a function because we're doubling up on those x values. So this was 2.1, our vertical line test.